Coming out of the theater, having just watched Scream 6, I was actually pleasantly surprised by the movie I just watched. If you watched my Scream 6 trailer reaction video, I was somewhat pessimistic. I mean, I tried to give an optimistic take on what might happen, that the fifth movie, the writers and directors were bogged down in the existing series and the existing characters. One of Scream 5's many problems was that they just had too many characters. And they were trying to serve, I think, a lot of different masters in terms of what they were trying to accomplish with Scream 5. And I said, well, that out of the way, Scream 6, new location, maybe they'll have the opportunity, the new filmmakers, new writers and directors, to make something that was uniquely, was their own. And it turns out that was kind of the case, that this movie felt different than Scream 5. Even though it was the same writers and directors as Scream 5, it felt a little bit different. They took the characters they just set up in Scream 5 as the new core, the new final girls, Sam and Tara, as well as some of the survivors from 5, and brought them into a new environment, brought them to New York City, also put them in the kind of the college situation, with an eerie parallel to Scream 2, as they mentioned in the movie, and really set off to make a movie that was kind of stood on its own, tried to do some different things, and was fairly successful. In preparation for going to see Scream 6 and for doing some content regarding the Scream series, I watched all the old Scream movies recently. And one thing I noticed about it, the series in general, with the exception of the first one, is how poorly most of them stood up to rewatching. And that really made me kind of pessimistic about this. I remember going into the theater, I was thinking, oh man, this movie might be really bad. The only track record we had for these writers and directors really was 5, which, as I said, I wasn't particularly impressed with. But again, to my surprise, this movie actually works pretty well. In this review of Scream 6, I'm first going to go over the pros, what I liked about the movie, have a little call to action after that, and then talk about what I didn't like about the movie, what held it back from being even better than it was. So the number one thing with Scream movies, as far as making them good, is how Ghostface is used. Ghostface is the iconic killer of all the movies. Even though it's a different person, or it's played by different people, it really is kind of a character into itself. Like, once they put the mask on, they kind of become Ghostface. And I stopped worrying about the fact that Ghostface in all the movies is over 6 feet tall, and nearly all the suspects are under 5'5". In the last movie, I think especially, I think at one point there was a question in Scream 5 whether or not Tara, who is the shorter sister of Sam, could be the killer. I'm thinking, that girl isn't 5 feet tall. How is she going to be Ghostface, who's clearly over 6 feet tall? But I stopped worrying about that. That's one of those continuity things that almost becomes irrelevant. Like, Ghostface is like a thing that once you put the mask on, you like become Ghostface. So regardless, how is Ghostface in Scream 6? And the answer is Ghostface is used pretty well. A lot of good Ghostface dialogue. The part of what makes Ghostface great is like the taunting and the personal shots, and how Ghostface interacts with the people he's stalking over the phone, during the stalking sequences. And I thought that was done pretty well in this one. There's some really good action set pieces with, Ghostface pursuing, chasing after the various potential victims. And generally, I thought Ghostface was used very well. Besides Ghostface, again, done very well, the other big thing I would say coming away from Scream 6 was how good the opening was. To me, this is clearly the best opening sequence of a Scream movie since the original. I don't think anyone will ever beat the original. It's probably one of, if not the greatest sequence in all the Scream movies, is that initial stalking of Drew Barrymore in the first movie. So I don't think anybody's topping that. But Scream 6, while staying in the general motif or style of the openings, which always are stalking, but taking some chances and doing something a little bit different than what you would expect, created something I thought stood apart from most of the ones that came before it. That's, again, besides the original. So that was a big selling point, because honestly, some of the other ones had been kind of lackluster, and the fact that they did just a good job with that was a great starting off point for the movie. Then there's a really, and you saw this in the preview a lot, there's a sequence, and it happens relatively early in the movie, with Ghostface and the two last girls, Sam and Tara, in a convenience store. And in the trailer preview I did, I was concerned about how well that would really work in the context of, a convenience store is actually a pretty small place. Like, how would you shoot that to make that interesting? And they did actually a really good job. It also is one of the best Scream stalking sequences, I think. And it's a certain type. It's the one where they, hiding from Ghostface kind of sequences, for the most part. And I thought they did actually really good job with that sequence. And it was another one of the best scenes in the entire movie. Um, Besides that, the other things I thought were particularly good about it were, I thought the twist was fairly well done. And honestly, that's been the case for most of them. There's only maybe one or two Scream movies where I didn't like what the twist ended up being. This one, there's some slight clues. There's not a whole lot. Even though I like to call the Scream franchise the kind of slasher whodunits, there's not a whole lot of clues about actually who the whodunit is. You really just find out at the end. And the important thing about it is that it makes sense. That it doesn't feel like it's cheap, or that it wasn't thought of through the entire movie. You don't want a killer at the end just be someone they picked out of a hat. You want to feel like that was the person that they set it up to be, person or persons, it's been both in Screams, that it's the right person. I'm just going to say person because it simplifies my speech here. Now as a tale about what happens in Scream 6 in particular, that it makes sense. And in this movie, I thought it made sense. I thought it's a little bit surprising, but not so much so as to be incredulous. I think the way one of the movies, I think Scream 3, was just out of the blue. Like, it could have been anybody. They just picked somebody. I guess it did kind of matter, but it felt very out of the blue. This one doesn't. It's guessable. I think the thought crossed my mind while I was watching it, but it wasn't super easy to guess, and it wasn't out of the blue. So I thought they had a good sweet spot for the reveal at the end. It works. The third act in general, aside from the twist, is also just generally pretty well done. It's got a couple different sections to it, but ultimately it works out pretty well, and I found it pretty enjoyable. And that was the general thing I would say about Scream. Is it starts Scream 6. It starts really well, and the end is really strong. The issues come in with the middle of it a bit. But before I get to the cons, let me ask you, if you watched the video so far and you're liking what you're hearing, please consider liking and subscribing. I'm trying to build up this channel, like doing movie reviews, as well as listicles and things like that regarding movies, especially genre movies, horror, sci-fi, action movies. And so I want to build a community that shares my interests and appreciate my input on the subject. Also, before I get to the things I didn't like, let me mention two more things I really enjoyed about Scream 6. One was the production values. Now, this is the second movie Wes Craven hasn't directed. He did the first four. And I think he was going for a particular style of production that was kind of B-movie-ish. The first one he even had it, but it seemed like it was expensively done. Some of the next ones, especially 3 and 4, look cheap. They look like they were cheap because they weren't trying to spend a whole lot of money on the movies. Even 5, to some extent, it felt like everything was being filmed on a movie lot. And that's kind of the issue with having movies take place in Westboro, the ones that did. 3 didn't, but it still kind of, to me, looked kind of cheap. This one, production values seem significantly better than all the other movies. And it's a change in the visual feel of the movies, but I didn't mind it because in general, and I like this movie went for a different tone. It tried to actually be a little more serious. This tone that Kevin Williamson struck, the writer of the first 4 movies, struck, was very much a balance between the very serious and the very comical. It's hard to get right. And a lot of the movies have sometimes, even the ones he wrote, have kind of tripped over themselves trying to kind of be too funny and too cute, while at the same time being a serious slasher movie. By serious, I just mean taking themselves seriously. Because a slasher doesn't take life and death seriously, then it's a joke. So you have to kind of take those moments where people's lives are at stake seriously. But the formula for Scream has tended to be trying to, with the other scenes that don't involve Ghostface and life and death moments, to kind of be more tongue-in-cheek. But that can be a hard balance to make. This one, except for 1 or 2 moments that mostly don't work, kind of just takes itself seriously. This is a slasher movie. These people are trying to survive. They're scared for their lives. And they're just taking it very seriously. And that's a tone that people may or may not like a whole lot. But I actually appreciate it because the comedy thing, I don't know. Chasing after that, I think has produced some movies with some very iffy dialogue and has more so sabotaged some of the Scream movies rather than made them better. I think Scream 2 did a good job with it, and that's about it. After that, they would have been better off just kind of taking themselves seriously. But not to a melodrama level, but just more serious. And this one does that. And on a related note, I didn't particularly like the final girls in Scream 5, Sam and Tara particularly. The whole darkness thing with Sam, they have a little bit more in this one, but they're kind of just making it part of her character. But she's growing on me as a last girl. Tara's cool. She's more of a one-note character. Sam, to me, is more of the central last girl character. It's in terms of the way they're written, not in terms necessarily of their fates. But Sam has really grown on me in this movie. Her character, the thing about Sydney, who was, all-time last girl, is Sydney had this combination of extreme vulnerability and extreme strength. Fortunately, I think for Scream 6 and 5, they're not trying to remake Sydney. This character, I think, is also tough, but her weakness or the thing she struggles with isn't a fragility that, say, Sydney had, but more so of a self-directed anger and fear. Like there's like she has a different internal challenges, and I think that works, and it worked better, I think, in this one than the last one. And her conflict with Tara is still there to a bit, but I think it develops a bit more. It's not a retread of 5, which I think is good. I hate when characters retread. That's some of the issue I've had with Gale and Dewey in 4, for example, was a retread of, to me, conflict that had already happened. And Tara and Sam's conflict feels new and a little bit different than what it was in 5, and kind of develops through the movie. And that's one of the subplots that actually works really well, is their relationship and how it's developing. So those are some more good points. So I said, Scream 6 was a pleasant surprise and had a lot of good stuff going for it. But there's some problems. The biggest problem, I would say, is it's a movie that's a little over 2 hours, and that can be okay if it's filled properly. The problem is, after the opening sequence, and then I think you have, pretty soon after that, you have the sequence in the convenience store. You have the sequence that is, you have a series of scenes that runs, I wasn't looking at my watch, but it must have been 30 or 40 minutes. No Ghostface. He just Ghostface disappears from the movie. And it's just the core characters from the original, a few additional ones. Gale's back, she's interacting with them, and you've got a whole bunch of back and forth, and they're trying to develop some subplots, and that's a good idea, but it just doesn't work very well, and it's kind of boring. And the end of that period there are some scenes that are necessary for setting up, later in Act 2 and Act 3, but it just goes on too long. It's a huge dull spot. When I'm watching the movie, I'm thinking, man, this thing is going off the rails. Fortunately, the second half of Act 2 and Act 3 make up for it, and still, I think that movie ultimately still works. But it's a huge hindrance to the movie, the fact that you have this dragging sequence where they're introducing more characters. They bring in Hayden Panettiere, who I liked a lot in 4. I was glad she was coming back, but I didn't like her performance in this one as much. They tried to change her a bit, I think make her a little bit more serious, and as a result of that, some of the charm is gone. She's a very charming character, and I think that was on display in 4. This one, a lot of that's mostly gone. The characters in Scream 6 are kind of a mixed bag. I like Sam and Tara. Mindy, who's related to Randy and kind of tries to take up the mantle of being like the person who's trying to gamify the life and death situation they're in. She takes up that role. She has a big scene where she tries to kind of do her full-on Randy role of saying who's the suspects and who can we trust and what are the new rules. Doesn't work that well. It felt out of place in terms of the tone that they set for this movie in general. So I wish they had done that scene a little more instead of trying to almost make it funny. I think it needed to be there because they kind of reused some of those themes later in the movie, but it just didn't work that well. And that's kind of how I felt about the Mindy character. Chad, who was the jock, the big black, strong black, buff black dude from the last one, who is apparently Cuba Gooding, played by Cuba Gooding Jr.'s son, Mason Gooding. Didn't like him very much. Gale was fine. Gale actually had some good moments in this, I would say. So the characters are kind of a mixed bag. There's also some additional other characters, and they're also kind of a mixed bag. There's a sex-positive roommate. She's got a couple good lines. There's Chad's roommate. He's got a couple good lines. So they generally cast, it's one of the better casts of the Scream movies, but there definitely are some ones that don't bring a lot to the some performers that don't bring a whole lot to the table. And here's a bigger problem, which was the subplots they tried to make between those characters didn't work very well. So one of the big things about Scream, the original Scream, was kind of good is there were a lot of little subplots between the 6 or 7 main characters, or interactions, like between Gail and Sydney, and Gail and Dewey, and Sydney and her boyfriend, and Sydney and her girlfriend. There were all these little subplots, and it's kind of what made the friendships and the relationships feel real in that movie that some of the Scream sequels haven't done a nearly as good job with. And Scream 6, I didn't think did a particularly good job. They tried. There's several dynamics like that between characters. Mindy has a girlfriend. There's a budding romance between 2 of the main characters. So they're trying to do that. But aside from the core Sam and Tara subplot and their dynamic, most of them aren't that compelling. So that's the problem. The subplot thing didn't work very well. And what happens is, what that means is the scenes that don't have Ghostface in them suffer. And that was part of the problem, is that a lot of the scenes without Ghostface, be it that long 30-minute sequence or some of the few other ones, just don't work that well because the character's dynamic isn't particularly strong. And that was one of the things that made the first Scream great and keeps this Scream from being better than what it is. The last thing I want to talk about is one of those things that it doesn't really keep a movie from being good, but they're very noticeable, especially after you finish watching it. One thing is, there's a scene that's totally optional that's in the movie. There's a scene that you could take out, that you could edit out of the movie, that wouldn't affect a single thing after it. You wouldn't think so watching that scene. The scene made it look like there was a meaning and value to it. Just to give you a little idea, it's not that late in the movie, so there's no spoiler, but it's a kill scene between Ghostface and the character, and he kills somebody and steals something. And you think, oh, this is matter. It's going to be important. Doesn't matter. And it makes me think it's something that should have died in whatever the last rewrite was, but they left it in because they liked the kill, because the kill is kind of cool. But they probably should have taken out. So you have that, which extends the length of the movie. It's like a 3-4 minute scene, so it's not nothing. It's a significant chunk of time that you're just leaving in the movie. So you have that, and then you have 2 giant plot holes. And by plot holes, what I mean is there's 2 moments, or 2 kind of times, where characters should make phone calls to other people that they don't. There's no explanation for why they don't. It causes problems. And as you're watching the movie, you're thinking, why aren't they calling that person to warn them? And they just don't. And I think the writers just thought, we just have to hope they don't notice, because it's so blatantly obvious. I can't imagine the writers of this movie didn't think, we have to figure out why they don't call them. They just said, F it. We'll just do a scene transition, hope they don't notice it. And that happens twice, I think. One time it's gigantically obvious. If you watch other videos, I'm sure they explain it in more detail. But there's another scene to where it happens too. And it jars you out of the movie. And especially the second time it happens, or the later time in the movie it happens. So those hurt the movie a little bit too, because I'm not real big on, if you think about a movie long enough, you can find problems with the story and with the plot. But as you're watching it, you shouldn't feel like characters are not doing very obvious things. That takes you out of the suspension of disbelief and reminds you you're watching a written movie where somebody a year ago or 2 years ago wrote on a piece of paper and decided what was going to happen. You want to forget about that and pretend what you're seeing on screen is alive and real. And plot holes that big jar you out of that. So I heard a little bit too. So what's the final verdict? Final verdict is, I recommend this movie for anybody that's seen and liked a Scream movie, and anyone that generally likes slasher movies, or slasher whodunits, that subgenre, which you don't see a whole lot anymore, but I kind of like. I like most of the movies that have been made in that genre, even the ones that are a lot worse than Scream 6. But this one, I give a 7 out of 10. That's the kind of the baseline level for recommending movies for me. That it sets itself apart from some of the lesser Scream movies. Isn't nearly as good as the first Scream, which I don't know. I think that was lightning in a bottle. I don't know if even Kevin Williamson couldn't duplicate it. I don't know if anybody else will. All the great things about that, which I hope to make a video about explaining about why Scream was so great. But this movie, I thought, was perhaps the second best Scream I've ever seen, which I'm surprised to say 6 movies deep. So I'm hoping to try to gain some subscribers. Let me tell you a little bit about what my plans are for the channel over the next few months. I'm going to do a few more videos about Scream, so deciding which ones. I have a bunch of ideas, trying to decide which ones to move forward on. I think I definitely want to do one about Scream 4, which I think I have a unique take about it. Then I'm going to move on to anticipating some of the new summer movies and do some videos about the Fast and Furious series because Fast 10's coming out in a few months, and the Mission Impossible series because Mission Impossible, I think is it Deadly Reckoning, Dead Reckoning Part 1 is coming out. So I'm also going to continue to do trailer previews for trailers that look interesting to me that I might want to see or that have huge warning signs I want to kind of warn people away from. So if that kind of stuff interests you and you think you might want to watch more videos from this channel, please consider subscribing. If you like the video, please like. So I'm going to put a recommended video over here. Check it out if you want to watch more of my content. And thanks for watching this video all the way through. I really appreciate it.